Okay, hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for giving me a chance to share my experience in research in the field of biotechnology of years today. And it's so impressive even today, and I'm glad to be here and so honored to be here. As a biotechnologist from Mahidol University, today I would like to show you something very small, but it's so powerful. That organism called yeast, a small microorganism that some of you might be familiar with it because it is in our daily life. As a biotechnologist, today I would like to show you how can we use the advance of technology to use this in more field, more aspect that we have never imagined about it. So it's come to the topic of my talk today, which is yeast biotechnology for future biomanufacturing. Okay, maybe I should start with asking you a simple question. How many of you have heard about yeast? Some may answer, oh, I think I saw it in the kitchen. I saw it in the supermarket, maybe in the form of dry yeast that we use it for making bread, making donuts. Okay? And this process, using yeast metabolism to produce carbon dioxide gas that would make the dough become a rice and become fluffy. That's the process that we need, the metabolism of yeast. Some might answer, I know that we can use yeast for the productions of some alcoholic beverages, such as beer, wine. This is also using the yeast metabolism to produce alcohol in the form of ethanol that would give a flavor to this kind of beverage. Then, how about another kind of use of yeast in our daily life? Some may find some yeast in a drugstore in the form of probiotic yeast. Yes, some species of yeast can be used as probiotic to stimulate our gut homeostasis. And some yeast product, which called beta-glucan, is a compound that produced by yeast cell itself. It's a compound that when we consume, it will become an immunostimulant of our body. That's another kind of supplement that you can find at the drugstore. And also at the same time, yeast contain a lot of nutrients, especially vitamins. And some form of vitamin B complex has produced from yeast. Now you might get an idea, yeast can be used to produce food and health supplement. And how about some other uses? Okay, and some might answer that I know that we can use yeast to produce bioethanol that can be used as a kind of fuel for vehicles. Yes, if you go to a gasoline station, you can find a lot of kind of gasohol in Thailand, maybe in the form of E20, E85. And all of this bioethanol produced by yeast. In the industrial production, we're using yeast to change the sugar from plant into an ethanol that can be used as a fuel. And why we need to produce bioethanol? Because we have a petroleum fuel or fossil fuel. Some might get an idea that I just give you the first that it's very environmentally friendly or it's good for our environment. I will give you an idea later why we need to use fuel or energy from biology from the organism. And another question is that, can yeast only produce ethanol? Can it produce some other kind of energy? This is maybe few of you might know that it can produce another kind of oil. And this kind of oil will be produced by a specific species of yeast in a group of yeast called oleaginous yeast. Or in a common way, how to say is a oil hyperaccumulating yeast. It's a group of yeast that accumulates a so high amount of oil in their cell or in their body. How much it will accumulate? Approximately more than 50% of its cell, of its dry weight, is oil. Sometimes it will be as high as 70 or 90% of their body. Can you imagine that? If your yeast, more than of your body, 90%, 80% of your body is oil, it's fat. For human, oh no, it's not good for us. But for this case, it's a very good microorganism for our future in terms of alternative energy. And the type of oil that yeast produce or accumulates is TAG, or triacylglycerol. It looks something that's also difficult to remember. But I think some of you might have heard about triglyceride. That's not good for our health. But for this case, it's a similar thing in yeast. The TAG can be converted to some other kind of energy. For example, it can be produced into biodiesel, into aviation fuel, into another kind of biolubricants, or even to produce bioplastic. Okay, so right now you may know that, we can use yeast to produce oil, to produce ethanol. But why we have to use it? You might know, maybe it's good for our environment. I will give you an idea why it's good for our future, for our environment. Because it contributes to the carbon neutral future of us. Let's think about, I think all of you may know that plants will absorb carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and will change the carbon from carbon dioxide into sugar or carbon sources in the plant. And if we use plant as a raw material for yeast to produce ethanol, to produce oil or biofuel, yes, all of this carbon will be changed by the reaction, by the chemical reaction inside the cell to the form of bioethanol, to the form of biolipid. And then when we use the biofuel, bio-oil from yeast, by car, by vehicle, even it will lead to a release of carbon dioxide into the environment. But think that the plant will absorb that carbon dioxide again and will bring the carbon back to the cycle. So you see that there are no emission or no increase of carbon in the atmosphere that will contribute to the carbon neutral, which is one aim of the future of human being. Okay, right now you may know, it's good. But sometimes I know that it's so expensive. The production cost might be so high, but how we can cut the cost, the production cost of energy produced by yeast? One idea that I would like to give you is that we can use the advance of biotechnology called genetic engineering. This is a technique that we can engineer the gene in the organism. We can add the gene, we can delete the gene, we can enhance the productions of protein enzyme by some regulations of the gene as we want. By using this technique, we will get the new function, new efficiency And to make the yeast be able to produce ethanol or oil as more efficient as much as possible, we can use a technique that's called metabolic engineering. This technique will optimize the metabolic pathway inside the cell, the biosynthesis pathway inside the cell, to be able to produce the product we want as high as possible. Okay? So that by using this, we can generate or engineer the yeast to be able to produce ethanol at high level, can accumulate lipid at more level than ever. And by combining all of the technique, we can generate a new strain of yeast. One, make them become tolerant to many stresses during the process. Let them be able to produce high ethanol, can accumulate high lipid inside their body. One idea that I have not talked to you yet is why we need to improve its tolerance. The first, let's think about the productions of ethanol. You know that ethanol is toxic for our body, right? For yeast cell, it's toxic for yeast cell also. So the production often ends when ethanol be at high level, so yeast cell will die. So we can use all of this engineering technique to let yeast become stronger, so we can get higher production yield. And another thing that's very good for our country, which is in the tropical regions, is that in our lab, we are trying to generate the yeast that not only be able to tolerate to ethanol, but be able to tolerate to high temperature. So one of highest cost for the productions is that we need more energy, more electricity to reduce the temperature in the fermentation by cooling the temperature inside the tank. If we could generate a new yeast strain that could tolerate higher temperature, so you can imagine that the cost for the production will reduce. And can we use it to produce some other thing? Yes, we know that. We can use it to produce food, supplement, energy. How about the other aspect? Some might know, some might never heard or never know that yeast can be used as a medicine factory to produce some pharmaceuticals, some medicinal compound that we currently use. Some example is insulin. I think that some insulin, the commercial insulin in the market, half of them produced by yeast. But you know that, but yeast do not have insulin. Insulin comes from human. How we can produce insulin in yeast? We use back to the engineering, genetic engineering. We can insert the human gene inside the yeast and let yeast be able to produce human protein like insulin. That's the idea. And another example of pharmaceutical produced by yeast is vaccine, especially the HPV or hepatitis B vaccine. I think most of the commercial product in the market produced by yeast, using the similar genetic engineering technique to produce some part of the virus in the yeast. And then we can use that particle, that yeast virus, as a vaccine for human. And this will enhance possibility to produce other kind of modern medicine or modern therapy. And right now, when technology is advancing every day, another technique called synthetic biology become available right now. What the difference between synthetic biology to the general genetic engineering is that for the typical genetic engineering, we will insert just a single gene, one gene into the yeast and let them produce some product. But synthetic biology is that we be able to put the whole process of some other organism into the yeast cell and let yeast be able to produce some beneficial product. I give you some ideas that, for example, you might know that some herbal plant can produce a drug, such as artemisinin, which is currently used as anti-malarial drug. It's a compound originally produced by plant. But right now, scientists could put the whole production process or biosynthetic process of plant and put it into the yeast cell and let yeast be able to produce this compound. Another example that has been currently reported is, recently reports is that we can let yeast be able to produce terpenoid fragrance from plant, from some plants such as agarwood, sandalwood, or even vanilla. We can let yeast be able to produce all of the fragrance. We have no need to grow the plant. We have no need to cut the tree. We just let yeast produce all of this compound in the tank. Then, after you listen to my talk, you might know that yeast could be a producer of food, can be used as supplement, can produce future energy for human, can be used for the productions of pharmaceutical. So, although it's very small, but I think it contains very big future for us. Then, the last thing I would like to say before the end of my talk is that I believe that the next industrial revolution may not be built by machines or by smokes or by steels, but might be grown inside a tiny cell like yeast. Thank you very much.